iOS 17.4 has arrived. Linux is at 4% market share, some wins and losses in the politics section, and more. Welcome to Surveillance Report 170, where we're dedicated to keeping you private and secure with the latest news from the past week. It's been a little bit of a slower week, but we're going to talk about it all the same. I am Nathan from The New Oil. Henry is never here. Now, we had some scheduling conflicts this week. Hopefully, we will be back together next week, but thanks for being here with us. If you want to help support this podcast and keep us going with all the time that we put into it, we have several ways to do that. We have a Patreon for $5 a month or more. You get to ask us a question on the Q&A. For $10 a month or more, you don't have to listen to this promo segment, and we also have more analysis, thoughts, and opinions when we're both here. There's a little bit more back and forth banter and stuff like that. And by the way, you get a discount for an annual plan if you pay upfront all at once. If you are not a fan of Patreon, that's fine. We have LibrePay. There are no perks, but it is a much better company. It's actually an open source project. They do still use like Stripe and PayPal for payment processing, but it's a little bit more privacy respecting just in terms of trackers and stuff like that. And last but not least, there is Monero. There's no perks. It's not automated, but it is fully anonymous and we don't know anything about you. So for those of you who are able to support us financially and do so, we really appreciate you and thank you for keeping the podcast going. Okay, I have a real quick PSA. Some of you guys have noticed we've been playing around with different thumbnails and title formats on YouTube. One of the reasons we're doing that, I mean, there's always the general like trying to optimize, trying to reach new audiences, bringing the message of privacy to everyone and stuff like that. So we're always trying new things. But one of the bigger factors is that YouTube just doesn't like longer titles. I think the general rule that I've heard is like 50 characters or less, actually. It has been in the thumbnail. We're going to continue to put the episode number in the thumbnail. And we're also going to put the number in, he said the description here. Q&As will continue to not have an episode number in either the thumbnail or the description. I hope that helps. Look for the episode number in the thumbnail. It's in the top right corner. And keep an eye out for the episode number in the description. And if you guys want something chronological, you either have to subscribe to the playlist or RSS, or you could go to like PeerTube or Mastodon. Like there's other platforms to follow us where you can find out chronologically when the episodes are being posted. I know we're trying to get back to a more consistent like episodes on the weekends and Q&As towards the middle of the week. Although again, I know YouTube doesn't always show you stuff right away. We're always trying new things and some things are going to work and some things are going to not. So appreciate your feedback. Although to be 100% honest, I think some people have really made a much bigger deal out of this than necessary, but to each their own, I guess. Hopefully that will help moving forward. Okay, with that out of the way, we'll start off with the news. And our highlight story this week that's going to start us off is about iOS 17.4 finally being out of beta, and it's here. And this is really especially a big deal for Europe, although, of course, any major release of an operating system is kind of a big deal for everyone who uses it. So 17.4 is now available, introducing new emojis and a cryptographic security protocol for iMessage. We've covered that on a previous episode. iMessage is now getting post-quantum encryption, basically, which is, of course, always a plus. We definitely like to see people improve their security, alongside some major changes to the App Store and contactless payments for the iPhone platform in Europe. Apple is making several of these changes to comply with the EU's Digital Markets Act, or DMA, which I think we're going to talk about a little more later, a law that aims to make the digital economy fairer by removing unfair advantages that tech giants hold over businesses and end users. Again, we've covered most of this in the past. The contactless payment thing, I believe they're talking about you can now add an actual card number to Apple Pay, so you can buy things online without using your real card number, which is, of course, helpful from a security perspective. And then major changes to the App Store. We've also covered that in a past episode. Apple is going to be allowing, I'm trying not to rehash it for everybody who's been following and heard the news, but at the same time, for anybody who's new, Apple's really doing a lot of malicious compliance right now. They have been ordered to allow sideloading and alternate app stores. So they're doing that, but it's coming with a lot of caveats about like there's different fee structures. And once you hit a certain number of downloads, the fees go up. And also you can't have different versions of the app. The example I think of is iVPN in F-Droid. For a long time, Google would not allow the iVPN app with their tracker blocking feature, but in F-Droid they could have it. And you can't do that on iOS. You still can't like go to GitHub and download the APK directly, or whatever the iOS version would be. Things like that. And they've been very intentionally onerous about it and difficult because they're basically throwing a temper tantrum. I'm going to see if I can find those past episodes just where we've talked about these things, and I'll link them in the show notes. Just again, for anybody who's new here and doesn't remember this stuff. But there's goods and bads here, and we have been very critical of Apple in the past for this. I mean, I'm doing it right now. Like they're being maliciously compliant. They're throwing a temper tantrum. They're just being a garbage company right now because they're Apple. But It does come with some good things. Again, iMessage is going to be more secure. There's that virtual card number for people who, don't have access to things like MySudo, privacy.com, stuff like that. So it's a mixed bag. And I mean, there is an alternate app store now. It is not well executed. It is difficult, and they're actively trying to discourage people from using it. But technically, it does exist. And I think it's fair to point that out. Again, they need to do better. But yeah, my whole point, it's a mixed bag. But that is here. Again, big news for all iOS users, regardless of whether you're in the EU or not. If you're not in the EU, you won't be seeing the other app store, but you will be seeing the iMessage improvements. I'm pretty sure you should get the card number thing. And then actually, while we're on the topic of Apple and the EU, I'll just go ahead and add this to the highlight story. Apple will cut off third-party app store updates if your phone leaves the EU for a month. So basically, again, if you're in the EU, and just to be clear, Apple has said they're going to use a number of different mechanisms to enforce this. So simply switching your VPN to like Germany or something is not going to be enough to fool your iPhone into being like, oh, now you can add this app store. It's going to be a little more like, I think they're going to use the GPS chip. And I think they said they're going to use a couple other things. They're like really trying hard to make sure nobody else is using this except people in the EU. And I think truthfully, they're also trying to punish EU users and make sure they can't get around it. But for those in the EU, basically, if you're out of the EU for more than 30 days, your alternate app stores will no longer update. You'll still have the apps. You should still be able to use them, but they just won't update. And I think for the vast majority of day-to-day users, this probably won't be a huge issue because maybe it's because I'm American and the idea of time off is like culturally shamed. But I feel like most people don't take multi-month vacations out of the entire continent. So, I'm sure people will like come here, visit family, stuff like that, but they probably won't be gone long enough for this to actually kick in unless you're like a digital nomad or you're here for like 6 months on some kind of special project or something. Again, not excusing it. I remember saying on a previous episode when they first talked about sideloading, I was like, I don't think they're going to do 2 versions of the App Store, one for Europe and one for the rest of the world. And I was wrong about that. So my point being, I don't think this is the right approach for Apple, obviously, but that's what they're doing. So yeah, that's what's going on with Apple this week. With that, we'll move into our data breach section. We'll start off with American Express credit cards exposed in a third-party data breach. So this was the result of a third-party vendor being breached. There's no word on who it was or how many customers were impacted, but it did lead to card account numbers, names, and expiration dates being accessed by the attackers. Okay, our next story says Fidelity customers' financial info feared stolen in suspected ransomware attacks. So this actually goes all the way back to the fall, but we haven't really had a whole lot of details up until just recently. This comes from Fidelity's life insurance branch. It says criminals have probably stolen nearly 30,000 Fidelity investment life insurance customers' personal and financial information, including bank account and routing numbers, credit card numbers, and security or access codes after breaking into Infosys IT systems in the fall. This was filed with the Maine Attorney General's office, and at this point, they have been unable to determine with certainty what personal information was accessed as a result of the incident. However, they believe it includes names, social security numbers, states of residence, bank account and routing numbers, and or credit card and debit card numbers in combination with access code, password, and PIN for the account and dates of birth. And our last data breach story comes from Switzerland, where the Play ransomware gang leaked 65,000 government documents. This comes from the National Cybersecurity Center of Switzerland, and they've released a report on their analysis of the breach following a ransomware attack on Explain, which is a Swiss technology and software solution provider for various government departments, administrative units, and even the country's military force. And this happened back in May of 2023. So out of those 65,000 documents, approximately 1.3 million files published were relevant to the federal administration. 95% of the files impacted the administrative units of the Federal Department of Justice and Police, the Federal Office of Justice, the Federal Office of the Police, the State Secretariat for Migration, and the Internal IT Service Center, ISC-FDJP. The Federal Department of Defense, Civil Protection, and Sport were minorly affected, with about 3% of that data. Around 5,000 documents contain sensitive information, including personal data like names, email addresses, telephone numbers, and addresses, technical details, classified information, and account passwords. And a small set of a few hundred files contained IT system documentation, software, or architectural data and passwords. The announcement says that the administrative launched the investigation on August 23rd of 2023 and is set to be complete by the end of this month. The full results and recommendations will be shared with the Federal Council. It was a very light week this week, so we're going to go ahead and move on to companies. To comply with the Digital Markets Act, WhatsApp and Messenger will become interoperable via Signal Protocol. So quoting the article, Meta today is offering more details about how it plans to make its messaging apps WhatsApp and Messenger interoperable with third-party messaging services as required by the new EU law, the DMA. The company had earlier shared that engaging with third-party chats would be an opt-in experience for users, given that the new integrations could be a source of spam and scams. In addition, Meta says that it will ask third parties to use the Signal protocol, though it may make exceptions to this in the future. Specifically, Meta says that it will only allow third-party developers to use another protocol besides Signal, quote, if they are able to demonstrate it offers the same security guarantees as Signal, unquote. And then the article goes on to note that both WhatsApp and Messenger use the Signal protocol. Overall, yeah, I think this is a good thing, especially because I know WhatsApp is really popular in other parts of the world. Thank you to viewers who have educated us on why that is, because I know in the past, I was like, why is WhatsApp so popular? I've also met several people who are like, yeah, I'm still in university and like everything is done on WhatsApp, like all the school group chats and class projects, everybody uses WhatsApp. So I'm kind of forced to use it. And I think this is great because now you're not going to be forced to use WhatsApp anymore. You will be able to use Signal and then interoperate with WhatsApp. Okay, and this last one I just thought was interesting. It says, turn any website into an app with Chrome 124. The title kind of says it all. Progressive web apps, Chrome, Google has really been pushing those. So they're kind of leading the charge on that. And apparently now with Chrome 124, they're just like, yeah, any website. I'd imagine there's got to be exceptions, but the article says like any website can be turned into an app on 124. So right now, this is only in Chrome Canary, which is the daily build. So it's kind of like super alpha version. And for some reason, it still requires enabling the flags. The article didn't specify when this will come to the public, when or if the flags will be enabled by default eventually, or if this will end up downstream in browsers like Brave. But it's an interesting development. We'll keep you updated if we hear anything more. Okay, no research articles came across my newsfeed this week, so we're going to go straight into politics. The US sanctions the founder of spyware maker Intellexa for targeting Americans. According to the article, this is the first time the US government has targeted specific people in addition to the companies in relation to the misuse of commercial spyware, and it signifies an escalation of the White House and US government efforts to curb the spyware industry. The US Treasury imposed sanctions on the founder of Intellexa and a veteran of the spyware industry and another individual who has a leadership role in Intellexa who is an expert in offshoring and provided the company with managerial services such as renting office space in Greece. The article actually names them. I just didn't want to get caught up in that. It's not really relevant to what we're talking about today. The US government alleges that they had a role in developing spyware that was used to target Americans, including US government officials, journalists, and policy experts. The government did not provide evidence to support the claim that Intellexa spyware was used against US government officials. The sanction also targeted the Intellexa consortium, which includes Intellexa SA, a Greece-based spyware developer company that has exported its tools to authoritarian regimes, the Ireland-based Intellexa Limited, which acts as a reseller for the consortium, Citrox AD, a North Macedonia-based company in the consortium, which I believe we've covered on a past episode, the Hungary-based Citrox Holding ZRT, which developed the Predator spyware, and the Ireland-based Thelistris Limited. Okay, this next article was really difficult to read, to be completely honest with you. It didn't really give a lot of backstory or context. I think because of that, it was a little harder to follow than necessary. So I apologize if I got any of these details wrong, but I tried my best to make sense of this. The headline says, tracking ads industry faces another body blow in the EU. So it's been over 2 years since a key piece of the tracking ads industry consent collection apparatus was found to breach European Union's data protection laws. So this is the part where I'm a little unclear on the context, but I think what they were saying is that your privacy choices can generate data. Like, for example, using Do Not Track. And I've actually seen somebody demonstrate this. So when you have Do Not Track enabled, it adds a section to the header that it sends to every website that says Do Not Track 1, like 0 or 1. And 1 is yes, 0 is no. If you don't have Do Not Track enabled, that header is just not there. I don't know if it's been proven or it just speculated, but I've heard people say that, like, if you have Do Not Track enabled, since they see that header, that's kind of one more data point that they can use to fingerprint you. And also companies aren't required to honor that anyways, so they can just add that to everything else they're trying to fingerprint. Anyways, long story short, the Court Justice of the EU, the CGEU, has ruled that using this as a loophole to track people violates GDPR. The CGEU also held that the Ad Industry Association responsible for devising the consent management tool, IAB Europe, is what's known as a joint controller with its advertising members, meaning it can't issue responsibility for ensuring the data processing complies with the GDPR. Our next story comes from New York City, where the governor says that the National Guard and more surveillance are coming to the subway. The governor announced that she's sending in the National Guard to the city's transit system to help the NYPD rummage through people's bags on the subway, and added that she plans to make it possible to ban people from accessing the MTA if they've been convicted of assaulting anyone within the system. It's not clear from the announcement how people will be identified as having an assault record or convictions before entering the subway, but the MTA is already heavily surveilled and policed area. It's hard to imagine how this would work in practice without even more intense surveillance of every person using the New York City's transit system. This comes as the transit system retires paper Metro cards, which could be bought with cash, and is moving towards the OMNY scanners, which are accessed using smartphone taps. In October, 404 Media revealed a major security flaw with the OMNY, what is that, Omni? I'm going to call it Omni. With the Omni system that has made it possible to stalk someone through their trip history, and we did cover that on a previous episode. The MTA is currently in the process of installing surveillance cameras in every subway car. In 2022, despite all the cameras and cops in the subway, a man opened fire in a subway car in Brooklyn and then traveled several stops, including a stroll around Times Square. It says Dime Square, and I copy and pasted, but I'm assuming that was a typo. Before a man on the street recognized him and pointed police toward his location. Okay, we have a quick privacy win. Spain tells Sam Altman and WorldCoin to shut down its eyeball scanning orbs. So you guys remember that? It sounded like a joke from Black Mirror, but it's a real thing because of course it is. It's like a little dystopian looking orb that it scans your retina and it gives you 50 coins in return. Well, Spain has said knock it off. The AEPD, which is Spain's data protection regulator, has demanded that the WorldCoin immediately ceases collecting personal information in the country via the scans and that it stops using data it has already gathered. España Martí said that the Spanish agency was acting on behalf of concerns that WorldCoin initiative did not comply with biometric data laws, which demand that users be given adequate information about how their data will be used and that they will have the right to erase it. I want to send a message to young people. I understand that it can be very tempting to get 70 or 80 euros that sorts you out for the weekend, but giving away personal data in exchange for these derisory amounts of money is a short, medium, and long-term risk. And then later in the week, we got this update. WorldCoin says it's paused services in Spain after filing legal challenge to temporary ban. All right, our last privacy story says India's election commission fixes privacy flaws that expose citizens' information seeking data. The Election Commission of India fixed the bugs in the Right to Information or RTI portal, which allows citizens to request access to records of constitutional authorities, as well as state and central government institutions and private organizations receiving substantial funds from the Indian government. The bug allowed access to the RTI requests, download transcription receipts and responses shared by the officials without properly authenticating user logins. Some of the exposed data included the RTI filing date, the questions asked, the applicant's name and mailing address, the applicant's poverty line status, and RTI responses. Okay, let's move into FOSS. So we're starting off with, it says the Biden administration kicks its open source software security work up a notch. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, will start providing more hands-on support to open source software developers as they work to better secure their projects. Open source projects are the foundation of most major software running today, but they're often riddled with easy-to-hack bugs because the developers lack the resources to properly update and maintain their projects. CISA hosted a 2-day invite-only summit this week with leaders in the open source software community and other federal officials. During the private event, the agency also ran what is likely the first tabletop exercise to assess how well the government and the open source community would respond to a cyber attack targeting one of their projects. During the summit, CISA and a handful of package repositories unveiled new initiatives to help secure open source projects. CISA is working on a new communication channel where open source software developers can share threat intelligence and ask the agency for assistance during an incident. The Rust Foundation is developing new public key infrastructure for its repository, which will help ensure that the code developers are uploading isn't malicious and is coming from legitimate users. NPM is requiring project maintainers to enroll in multi-factor authentication and is rolling out a tool to generate a software bill of materials, which will provide a recipe list of what code and other elements are in a project. And additional repositories, including the Python Software Foundation, Packagist, Composer, and Maven Central, are pursuing similar projects and also rolling out tools to help detect and report malware and other security vulnerabilities. Next up, Linux crosses the 4% market share worldwide. According to the latest data from StatCounter, a leading web traffic analysis tool, Linux market share has reached 4.03%. At first glance, the number might seem modest, but it represents a significant leap. It took Linux 30 years to secure a 3% share of desktop operating systems, a milestone reached last June. Impressively, the open source operating system has surged by an additional 1% in the last 8 months. The rise in Linux's popularity can be attributed to several factors. First, the open source nature of Linux has made it a favored choice among developers, IT professionals, and tech enthusiasts who appreciate the flexibility and control it offers. Additionally, the security and stability of Linux have been key selling points, making it an attractive option for both personal and professional use. Quick pause. Linux security has room for improvement. I want to note that because I know people are going to leave it in the comments. We know. We didn't write this article. However, while having great features is important, an attractive presentation often captures attention first, something both Windows and Mac understand well. This is precisely where the top Linux distros have made remarkable strides, significantly enhancing their appearance and user-friendliness in recent years. With the continuous improvement in user-friendly designs of distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Mint, and many others, Linux has become more accessible to a broader audience, including those who may not be as technically inclined. All right, our next story comes from Proton, who is providing free VPN servers in a lead-up to the elections. And this is to ensure that everyone can have access to accurate, reliable, and trustworthy information. Proton will make VPN servers available for free 2 weeks before elections in several countries with histories of misinformation and censorship. These servers will continue to be free for an additional week after the elections as well. Note that this availability range could extend depending on the situation in the country. So I'm assuming they mean like runoff elections and stuff like that. A full list of which countries and their election days are in the article. Note that this list may shift as elections are postponed or rescheduled, which has already happened in Senegal, for example. We will also be monitoring the situation in other countries and may provide additional free servers depending on events. We'll update this table accordingly, and you can keep up to date with the latest features by following us on X. Like I said, this is a short week, so we don't have any misfits. This is going to be our last story. Fedora Workstation 41 to no longer install GNOME-X.org session by default. I think it's pronounced Xorg, actually. Anyways, Fedora Workstation has long defaulted to using GNOME's Wayland session by default, but it has continued to install the GNOME-Xorg session for fallback purposes or those opting to use it instead. But for the Fedora Workstation 41 release later in the year, there is a newly approved plan to no longer have that GNOME-Xorg session installed by default. So recently there was a ticket opened about this. This is just about whether the session is pre-installed but would continue to live in the repo for those wanting to explicitly install it. The Fedora Workstation Working Group decided to go ahead with this change for the 41 cycle, not the upcoming 40 cycle. So Fedora 40 will still have this thing installed. It's not enabled by default, but it can be enabled if you need it. And then starting in 41, it will not be enabled. If I understood correctly, it will still be in the repos, so you can still pull it and install it if you need it for whatever reason. So yeah, it was a real short week, but we now have iOS 17.4 with all the good and the bad that it brings. Linux is at 4% market share, which is, a huge exponential increase in users, which is great. Again, some wins and losses in the politics section. We got some good news, some bad news, kind of a mixed week, kind of a little more slower week. Again, nothing major, but sometimes it's nice to have a slow week where there's nothing crazy setting on fire. I want to remind you guys that if you want to help support this podcast and keep it around, we have a Patreon. For $5 a month, you get to be part of the Q&A. For $10 a month, you don't have to listen to this promo spot. You get some more analysis, which I definitely had some commentary this week. Not all of it was just rambling. Some of it was ranting, but not all of it. And you do get a discount if you sign up for an annual plan. For LibrePay, there are no perks, but it is recurring, so you can set it and forget it, and it's a little bit better for your privacy on the front end. And Monero, there's no perks. It's not automated, but it is fully anonymous and private. See, like I said, we're not opposed to cryptocurrency. It just has to have a use, and Monero definitely does. And of course, times are really tough right now. If you cannot afford to give financially, that's cool. We totally understand. We still appreciate you listening. And if you could share the podcast around, share it with your friends and family, leave us a rating, leave a comment. If there's specific stories you want to share with friends and family, we have the Surveillance Clips channel where we post some of the stories throughout the week in an individual format so they're easier to share. All kinds of stuff like that. So thank you guys again for listening. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're trying to keep yourself private and secure and stay up to date on the latest news. Thanks for being with us, and hopefully we will both be back next week.